Airbrushes, do you go cheap or do you go expensive? Let's find out. Right, the brushes that we're going to be looking at today, we've got a cheap and cheerful. You're going to see these on Amazon, eBay. They are the mass-produced Chinese brush. You've probably seen some of them where they've got different coloured bodies at the back, but they're basically all the same. This is a 02 double action airbrush, so that's one we're going to look at. And then we're going to look at a more expensive brush, which is the new Evolution 2024 on a 028 by Harder and Steenbeck. So I'm going to put the same paint down both of these brushes. We'll move in closer, and then as we paint, I will talk you through what I'm feeling and what feedback I'm getting through the brushes, the trigger responses, how it feels, and then we'll have a good talk as we paint. Let's crack on. Right, first up is the cheap and cheerful one. Now, if you can see breath coming out, it's really cold in the studio. So putting my finger on top of the trigger, it just feels like you're putting on an ice cube. We're going to put some FW Payne's Grey mix in this. Now the mix that I'm using is, I'll put it on the screen now. So it's a thin paint consistency. You'll find with the cheaper brushes, when you start trying to push thicker paint through them, they don't like it, especially on a 02, they really won't like it. It'll come out really grainy. You'll just hear the sound of the brush change when you put a thicker paint through. Now set the air pressure for both brushes. I've got it on the main line at 20 psi. This Mac valve is opened fully up, so we've got 20 psi to test the brushes. So I'm going to drop some of the paint in, and I'm going to take the crown cap off for this. I'll do this with both brushes. So, a little test, just now. As you can see, we've got the little dots, it's doing them. Tight lines on it. So the cheap brush is doing it. Now, what I'm feeling through this as I'm spraying with it, I find the tension going down really stiff, pressing down on the trigger. It's very sort of bounces you back up, so it's very stiff on the trigger going down, and then pulling back is the same. It's got quite a bit of tension. Now you can slacken off the tension by doing that, and that'll make it a little bit more softer. But as you can see, it's getting down, but it's just that clunkiness in the trigger. It just feels really gritty, grindy and cheap, but it's spraying, you know, it's doing the job. It's atomizing the paint. Now this brush is around £10. I'll leave a link in the description to this one if you did want to pick one up, because it's spraying this really nice. Now, another reason why this brush is spraying this really nice is the paint mix. Hands down, it's the paint mix that's going through it that's making it look like it's, whoa, this is performing great, you know. But a beginner getting hold of one of these brushes and not getting their paint consistency right, you'll struggle. It'll make this brush be horrendous. It really will, put a real thick paint through it. The cheaper brushes do like a thinner consistency. I do find with these that you are quite close to the cup, because the angle on the cup's kicked back quite a bit. So you are, if you sit over the front, you're not going to do it. If you sit sort of here on the trigger, there's no way you're going to get your finger in that gap. So you are, this brush is tending to push you sort of to bang on the top or to the back to be able to use the trigger. But it's doing the job. So feeling wise, it's definitely stiff going down, and the tension on the back is really tight. Everything about the brush, you can hear it, That's just loosening and tightening the back. Everything sounds, hear it? That's the spring tensioner here, just moving that left and right. They're very gritty, and it's very hit and miss. With these very cheap brushes, it's very hit and miss whether you get a good one. Another thing you'll find with the cheaper ones, on your front ends of the brush here, I'll just get rid of this paint, we'll do a little bit more spraying, but on the fronts of these, you won't get solvent proof O-rings to the front. They're usually like a black rubber. And if you start chucking solvents through these, over time it just perishes the O-rings away and it will just ruin the spray. It'll just ruin the brush with the solvents going through it. Another thing you'll find is as well, when you come to clean these, just clean that bit out there, you can see inside the cup there, you've got like a slot. It doesn't go down sort of how the H&S brush would go down where you clean it. It's a lot more smoother going down the hole to the bottom where you put your paint in. This has got like a little sort of slot, so it can be a little bit fiddlier to get the paint out and clean down here. So if you've got a cheap one, just make sure you blast it through with your cleaner, your airbrush cleaner. If you wanted to back bubble it, you can just pinch. You can put your crown cap on with this and you can press there, pull back, and you can get the bubbles like that and just blast through. So my thoughts on this brush, the triggers are, I find the triggers are horrendous on them. They're just very clunky, just feel very mechanical. There's no smoothness there with these type triggers. Just very sort of, really feels mechanical. You can feel the cheapness in it when you pick it up. You probably won't, as a beginner, picking one of these up. You probably think, yeah, this is great, look at it, look at the chrome, it looks really nice. And if you get used to a cheap brush, you won't, it's just the norm. You'll just pick one of these up and it's like, yeah, and you'll just paint with it. It will work and it will get the paint down, as you've seen here. So what we'll do is we'll move over to the Evo. Now, this brush is 139 and you instantly, when you pick it up, you instantly feel quality in your hand, guys, you really do. The actual finish on these are incredible. You're getting a better chrome finish on these. And when you put your finger to the top on the trigger, this feels like silk. The Evo triggers at the top, they're really, really comfortable to the pad of your finger. And when you press down, there's none of this clunky feeling. When you press down and move back, it's very silky and soft. So you'll find this with the dearer brushes, they're just a lot better made. So what we'll do is we'll pull that through. On these, you've got a prong cap to the front. Now you can spray with the prong caps on, but I'll take it off because we took the crown cap off the other brush. We'll just pull this through. Now this is instant. You see the difference straight away? Just how accurate this brush is when it comes to putting the paint down. That is like super fine hairline straight away, and does it a lot easier because the release of the paint on the more dearer brushes is just better. They're better designed. The flow, the response, they're more comfortable. They're not gritty and grindy when you pull back or when you undo any of the sleeves on these, like the back. They're silky smooth. It's because each piece has been engineered to precision when it comes to H&S. It really is. And you'll just notice the difference straight away from a cheap brush going to an expensive brush, and just the way it atomises the paint drops this paint down a lot softer than what this did. A lot softer. You can get it down to like near on transparent what you can put down with this brush, and then you can just build it up. So So they atomise better, the triggers feel better, the response is better, the build quality is better. So is it worth getting a dearer brush, or can you airbrush with a cheap £10 one? You can airbrush with a cheap £10 one. But if you're aiming to start getting on, you want your detail and you want to get into your portraits and things like that, you'll just struggle with a real cheap brush. You really will. But it all goes down to what you can afford at the time. You know, if you can afford to go straight out and buy either an Evolution or an Ultra, you've got the money to do it, do it. If you've got the money to do it, buy one. If you've not, you go this route and you work up to something like this. You know, we all like to dream that we want really, really good brushes, but they do come at a price, and we all have to start somewhere. Now, if you do want to go cheap, me personally, I wouldn't recommend one of these as a cheap brush. Yes, it's like 10 or 15 quid. I just think you're going to struggle with it, because every beginner has really got to master the paint. You've got to get your paint mixes mastered first. And if you're walloping thick paints through some of these cheap brushes, you're just going to have a headache with it. You really are. So, cheap and expensive. My honest opinion, if I was doing a class in the studio for a beginner, there is no way on this earth I would put that in the beginner's hand to teach him to airbrush, because it's just going to struggle. It really is. You will struggle learning double action movement and things like that on a real cheap brush, because you've got, most of the time, you've either got delay in the trigger, they feel gritty, grainy, the springs are horrible. So I'd rather put, for the beginner, I'd rather on a class give them the Evo and go, right, you're going to learn with this brush because it's decent, it gives you pinpoint accuracy, brilliant trigger response, and you're going to learn that double action movement and trigger control better and easier with a better, more quality brush. You really are. And it's a more robust brush. And I know with a beginner sitting with this, I can, if something goes wrong, I can quickly guide him through, stripping the H&S down, showing him all the little points where you can, if you do get troubleshooting, I can go straight to this brush and go, right, do this, 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 and this is how it goes back together. And they can just watch it go all back together and go, right, yeah, I think that's the brush for me. It really is. But when you start fiddling around with the cheap ones and start taking them apart, we all know what they're like. Things don't go back together right. They're gritty, they're grainy, they're horrible, you know. But as I say, we all have to start somewhere. We all can't blow £139 on a brush. You know, we've got like a budget of £139 to get the whole kit, you know. So you'd buy the £10 brush, you'd buy a £70 compressor, and you'd buy 10 or £15 pack of 40 bottles of airbrush paint. But then you're going to scoop all that up after trying it and throw it in the dustbin because it's garbage. So if you can bide your time and save up, it's the best thing to do, is just to put your pennies by and pick out your brush, pick out a decent compressor, and pick out airbrush paint, and it just makes your journey so much easier. Why struggle? For the sake of saving up for an extra, say, 3 or 4 months, putting a little bit of money by, buy quality, and then you've just not got to replace it and replace it and replace it. Because I guarantee it, if you buy a cheap kit with the cheap paint, the first thing you're going to struggle with, for one's the brush, then you're going to struggle with the paint. So you'll like get the paint, then you'll bin that paint, then you'll pick up another batch of cheap paint, that'll be no good, and then eventually you'll buy airbrush paint. But then you'll throw away so much money before, and then you'll buy your airbrush paint. You'll do the same thing with the brush. You'll buy cheap, 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 and then you'll eventually buy expensive. And you've wasted all that money on all the cheap garbage package deal crap that's on Amazon and eBay. Airbrushing kits, they make them look all fancy, and you get 40 bottles of paint, and they give you an airline, they give you an airbrush hanger. You know, just put your money by and get yourself something decent from the start. I really would recommend that, and then your journey is just going to be so much easier. It really is. I mean, I had the pleasure of, at the time, I got and started off with like a second-hand Harder and Steenbeck at the time, which was a great brush. So I sort of went straight into airbrushing on something different, on something decent, but I got it cheap at the time. It was like £60 for the brush. And the teacher that taught me says, use this paint. Here's a decent compressor, which was a reconditioned one that he was selling. And I got the kit cheaper, but it was quality stuff from the off. So I'm just away painting. I'm now in front of most of the beginners that I got the real cheap brushes and the crap paint and the silly little air compressor. You're 3 or 4 steps in front of them now, and you're just flying. You're just painting. You're getting on with it because you've got decent kit. So that's my advice, guys. Cheap versus expensive. Try and save your pennies and buy decent gear. Thanks for watching. Drop your comments, tell me your thoughts, because there's going to be loads of comments on cheap brushes. People going, well, I've had a cheap brush for 15 years and it's still working. You've probably got a good one. So drop your comments and I will see you lot in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.